Welcome to this episode of the Culture Decoded podcast. Our guest today is Paul Taylor, CEO of Thought Machine. Paul describes himself as a serial entrepreneur, always in the tech space. He founded Rhetorical Systems in 2000, went on to found Phonetic Arts in 2006, which was bought by Google, and worked inside Google for a few years, and has more recently started Thought Machine, which has been running for 10 years, is a unicorn plus, and we're sitting in his offices in London, which are actually very cool architectural building in just north of the centre of London. So Paul, welcome to Culture Decoded.
Thank you very much. Yeah, good to be here. Yeah.
So let's start with Thought Machine. Tell us a little bit about the company, what you're trying to achieve, and a little about the market that you're trying to disrupt.
Yes, so Thought Machine is a B2B fintech enterprise software company. So in essence, we sell software to banks. And the particular software we sell are core banking and payment systems. And those are the two systems which run as the infrastructure in a bank. Every single bank needs core banking because that's where the ledger is, that's what stores the money. And every single bank requires payments because you got to get the money in and out of the bank, right? Okay. So, of course, every bank has those today, but the vast majority of banks are running on outdated legacy technology, which is well past its sell-by date. So, and that has many disadvantages, which we can go into. But in essence, Thought Machine is building brand new cloud-native software technology that will run those pieces of bank and get the banks off the legacy infrastructure.
Okay. The immediate question that comes from that is, as much as from a quick glance you'd think of banks as money businesses, they're in fact technology businesses, as I'm sure you appreciate. And many of their core banking systems are seen within these established legacy banks as their core operations. But also it historically has been incredibly hard to move off them. They have a problem in their inflexibility and their cost to maintain, and their lack of keeping up with security protocols, et cetera, et cetera. But also, because they're core operating systems, they are absolutely integral. They're the lifeblood of the bank itself. So what are some of the challenges of selling in an outsourced solution for something that's so core to these big banks?
Yes, well, you said it, but let me dig in. So core banking used to be something that somebody in a bank say it was something they used. So we use the core banking engine to recognize, to store the loans and have the balance sheet and so on and so forth. But now it is better to say that the technology, the core banking system is the bank, right? So the bank used to be made of this tool and an army of people. And when you went into a branch in the 80s and 90s, lots of people in there doing things, right? And then they used the core banking system as a tool to register loans and do credit checks and things like that. But now we're moving more to a world where the IT systems in a bank really are the bank, and they do everything in the bank. And the people in the bank are really there for to be the executives in the bank, or to run the IT systems, or to do some of the processes in compliance. And the people are less and less doing the kind of operational nature of the bank. So it is, in essence, doing many of the same things, as in recording loans and taking deposits and making payments, but it is the bank. Okay. So its importance in the bank has changed. And if you track any large bank and their statements about how much they spend on IT, it goes up and up and up, and how much they spend on operations and people go down. So it's very, very important. So it's critical in the bank. There's no banker will say it's not important, right? But the problem is they have to, like every other business, they have to operate in the modern age, and that technology needs to be fit for purpose in the modern age. But they've got a lot of this legacy infrastructure, which is difficult to move off. So when we say, what do we mean for the modern age? Just take something like payments. So we're all used to having debit cards and credit cards, but most of us have some payment system on our phone, and we use that 24/7. So, most of us don't get up at 3 a.m. and make a payment, but you might be traveling.
But you can.
It might be yes. 3 a.m. and you expect it to go. Now, in a traditional system, the bank is only open during business hours. So if you do it, that will clear. But if you do it after business hours, it'll clear the next day. And many people have seen where they kind of have two balances, one for, you've spent this, but it hasn't quite cleared. And the second one saying,
ending.
So if you ask a bank, how much money do I have? It will go, Well, that depends. This is absurd. So, of course, we're used to everything else. So take television. So in the UK, television used to shut at night, right? It used to go to about 11 and then it used to shut. And then they had a period where they had kind of, odd programs on. But now, of course, we expect Netflix or anything else just to go 24/7, every country, all the same. We don't really have a concept of turning off at night. So one simple thing is the bank has to run in real time. And if half of the bank is running in real time and the other half is not running in real time, that adds huge complexity. So that's one thing. The other thing is the landscape in terms of expectations are changing. We have products like buy now, pay later. We have all sorts of customized products in private wealth. People have loans and mortgages which are particular to their circumstances. So the range of things that people are doing financially, increases all the time. Many challenger banks have done very well by having very flexible and very easy to use foreign exchange controls because people are traveling all the time. It's not a weird thing that you're going to spend money from your regular bank account in a different country. So all these things are changing, and the competitive pressure in the landscape is changing. So, so if you ask somebody, is Amazon a bank? They would say no. You say, well, you can borrow money off Amazon. You can pay through Amazon. You put money into Amazon. In what sense so it's not a bank, but many people are encroaching on each other's turf. So it's a very competitive space, and it's not clear that banks just are in the same position they used to be. So all those things contribute to ensuring that banks have to change their IT systems.
So much in that. This episode is going to have a strong technological focus naturally. I'm interested to what degree you mentioned challenger banks, and I know that Curve and Atom are both clients of yours.
Yes.
And there is over the last 10 years in the UK, at least, there has been one of the big stories in banking has been the growth of these challenger banks, Starling and Revolut, etc. They're coming in from slightly different angles, but they are remote first. Some of them have no branches at all. Obviously, it is, to your point, the next stage of the use of technology, the recognition that banking is real time and you don't really need branches and people to do it effectively, manage money. How do you see that technical leap that you're presenting as an opportunity to your clients differing between the challenger banks and the incumbent banks? So because they are really two quite different worlds from an IT architecture perspective. It'd be interesting to tease that out a little bit.
Yeah, so they are. So challenger banks most challenger banks are, let me say, challenger banks split in two. So some build their own tech and other ones don't. Right. So Atom Bank, which is one of our longest held customers, is very identifiable as a bank in terms of business. It has assets and liabilities, and it makes mortgages and takes deposits, and very, very understandable from that. But they are not they're not a technology company. Whereas you look at Monzo, I think Monzo would say that they are a technology company first and a bank second, sort of thing. So I don't want to trample on anybody's feelings of those two statements, but I think that's true. So many of the tech focused banks, challenger banks, build their own technology, right? And they in a way look like us internally. But the ones who are set up by business founders, typically they would not do that, and they would get the technology from us. So if it wasn't for people like us, the world would look like the challenger banks having kind of cloud-based, modern microservice, real-time tech, and the established banks being on the mainframes and the legacy tech. But of course, our goal is to build this modern technology and make it available to both types of banks. Right. Make it available to challenger banks and to the established banks. And in so doing, when they deploy it, it actually looks quite similar. So you can have it both ways. You can say it enables challenger banks to have all the richness of the products and the stacks and the scalability of an established bank through our technology. And you can also say that when we sell to the established banks, that allows them to get a challenger bank sort of tech stack going as well. So really, when you look at how a challenger bank deploys us and how an established bank deploys us, it is pretty similar. And then, of course, that creates an entirely new, competitive dynamic.
That makes lots of sense. And there's immediate parallel to the airlines when they were disrupted by challenges around low-cost airlines. They were seeking to ultimately tack across to reflect those types of value propositions, more flexible pricing, more standardized seating, that sort of thing. Makes lots of sense. Let's talk a little bit about Thought Machine as a company, because we're always interested in culture, but also how organizations grow. You're 10 years old. You've had a series of funding rounds where I have to say your offices are fantastic and very aspirational for a company like us. So talk a little bit about how that's grown, particularly from a cultural perspective, because naturally startups sort of live and breathe and live and die really on the basis of their culture. So I'd love to hear you unpack that a little bit.
Yes, well, culture is very, very important at Thought Machine. As I was saying to you before the podcast, nearly everybody says it, but we really mean it. We really do. And by that, let me take it back to the start of the company. So I've been in good organizations and I've been in bad organizations, and I never really use the word culture with a capital C. But you can see that organizations can kind of be happy and they can kind of be unhappy. And I remember my father had a small business. It was a happy place. People were friendly to one another and people enjoy the work, and they went for a drink after work. And a friend of mine just started a new job, and they had a major success. And I said, well, shall we go for a drink after work to celebrate? No one wanted to. Right. So it's not all about drinks after work, but you can have a good culture kind of independent of being successful. But when I worked at Google, right, so my second company was acquired by Google. And when I was at Google, it was famous. So this is 2010 to 2013. And I was blown away by the Google culture. And Thought Machine in many ways is similar to the Google culture with a few changes. But essentially having excellent people were there. Having, people had to be friendly and cooperative with one another. No office politics, no stabbing people in the back, none of that. People were, really signed up to the major goals. It was very low on bureaucracy, very low on rules, very low on kind of drudgery that people didn't want to do. It was very focused on product quality and, getting users rather than bottom line and shareholder profit. I don't think we ever talked about kind of shareholder value or things like that. It wasn't discussed. I'm sure somebody discussed it, but it wasn't discussed. So I really like that. And I made some money out of the acquisition of Phonetic Arts into Google. So I wouldn't say I didn't need to work again, but I was certainly at the point in my life where I could have a lot of choice. So when I started Thought Machine, one of the first things was, so we're going to build a super successful company. But one of the first things is I'm going to build a company that's got a great culture. Now, the great culture, here's a bit where we kind of cheat a little. Great culture is defined by me as my view of what a great culture is. So we've got a very happy company here, and everybody here signs up to the same culture, and they don't see it as my culture. They see it as being owned by everybody. But for example, it's a very meritocratic culture, and we believe in debating. So in many meetings, we will have an open debate, and somebody junior will say, well, I don't agree with that. I think it should be done. And they have to argue their point. So many people think this is great. There's little hierarchy that we're always trying for the best. We're always trying for high goals. But a lot of people who worked in, for example, the more established companies where it's hierarchical kind of freak out a bit.
Particularly senior people.
Yes, because the authority is challenged all the time. Now, sometimes the debates go on too long, and I say, look, I know everyone's got a voice. We've been debating where this comma goes for ours, right? So it can be overdone. But a meritocratic culture, Google was like that. My academic environment was like that. So ideas, you have to back them up with evidence. You're not allowed to just shout people down and say because and everything else. So you add all that people up. A certain number of people love it, but we're very
stay.
Sorry,
and stay.
And stay
and do well.
Yeah, and stay and do well, and we know the sort of people who aren't going to fit because for example, another thing is that we have bias to action, and everybody has to be a doer. So even senior people get their hands dirty on tasks all the time, and you meet senior people from large corporates, and they haven't done any work in a very long time. I mean, their idea is telling other people what to do, and then they tell other people what to do, and then there's some poor soul at the bottom actually has to do the work.
The title of the director can be very unhelpful sometimes. It makes people think all they need to do is direct.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So I want to tease something out from what you said there, because it sounds like here you are very specific about the culture at Thought Machine. You articulate it. You talked about bias for action, talked about lack of hierarchy, you talked about the instinctive desire to collaborate, no politics. Have you articulated in some sort of cultural chart or cultural statements that you talk about openly? Is it written down?
Yes, it is. So we've got a set of company principles. I spent a lot of time on the company principles. So the first thing is, should you write anything down, because you go, sounds a bit prescriptive, right? It sounds like we're setting rules and things like that. But then the next thing you look at, many companies have, I think it splits into three. You've got mission statements, you've got values, and the one we took was principles. So we decided to go for principles, and the principles are quite long-winded and they're quite detailed. We got the principles initially from Toyota. So Toyota have 14 principles, which were famous. And then Amazon also had 14 principles. By the way, I think it was 14 from Toyota. It was definitely 14 from Amazon. And those are quite direct. So the problem with values is people say, like honesty and integrity and things like that. But that doesn't tell anybody anything, because you don't have companies that say, we're a dishonest company and we don't like integrity. Nobody says that. So the principles have to be clear, and it has to be clear that other companies would say, no, that's not our principle. So principle number one is product first, right? So our primary goal is to build the best product in the market. Now, lots of companies don't have products, right? Lots of companies are service companies. Not say they're bad, but everything else. Some companies say shareholder value or profit or market share is their number one. But our number one is product quality. We want to have an amazing product. So in that, without having a silly comparison, so Apple, I think, is a company which said product quality is number one to them. They want to have outstanding products, and they put things in products that they know that nobody's going to notice or find out about, but it just gives them a bunch of pride. Whereas, of course, other phone companies would say, well, we're after, we want to make it affordable, right? And that's a different thing. Our second principle is teamwork, right? So you have to want to work in a team, right? You can't just say, I don't want to talk to people. I just want to do my own thing. You have to work in a team. You have to be really good at your job, right? And so again, in a bunch of other companies, you'll see that they have good people in, say, sales roles or something like that, and then not so good people elsewhere. But for example, when we look at every role, we just hired we've got a coffee bar downstairs. We just hired a barista and put that person through extensive tests on how to make coffee and different knowledge of cakes and confectionery and demeanor and things like that. And why wouldn't you? Because that person interacts with nearly everybody every day and puts a smile on everybody's face, and obviously want them to make good coffee and everything else. So every role gets a lot of attention, and every role is interviewed carefully for it. So the principles outline all these things, and they're quite explicit, and we hope that helps guide the organization. Once we got past about 100 people, I think we had to write it down because it was too difficult.
Very common. And that's the scale-up challenge, isn't it? It? To a certain degree, up until 100 people, the founder's leadership shadow and style dominates, but also you can pretty much spread it through personal interaction. As soon as you're above that number, you can't.
So another thing we have a thing called question time. So question time, it's I guess it's half Prime Minister's questions and half BBC TV program question time. But I go on stage once every 6 to 8 weeks and have half an hour, 45 minutes where the company asks me questions about anything they want. And one of the most frequent questions over the years was, when we're 50, but if we grow, how are we going to keep our culture? So they started asking when we're 20 people, when we're 50 people, 100 people, 200 people. And so if somebody like me, you'd asked me, what did I not expect to happen that has happened? I thought, like many people, the culture would get diluted and it'd all become a bit corporate-y and a bit bland, but it hasn't. And I think,
but not by accident, by the sounds of it. There's been a lot of deliberate thought that's gone into it.
My honest goal, yes, but you would think it would kind of diminish as it would go. But my honest thought is that good cultures get owned by people, and people replicate it, and people buy into it. And you find people who've only been here for a short period of time interrogating new candidates about our culture, as if and so it is infectious, I would say, and which is a very good outcome.
It's ultimately scalable. It's only so if you are deliberate and explicit and exclusive about it from the get-go.
Yes, and I also think you need to be clear that companies lose culture because of integrity issues, right? So often they overshoot. So they say they say principles or values, and then they do something completely different, right? So that's not good. But you also have to say that the principles are aspirational, right? We don't say we're always like this all the time. So we say, we have, a bias to action. It's not true that in every day, in every circumstance, every interaction, we always get that right. It's not true, but we always try to, right? So we set the high bar. We always aim for it. We're a bit short, but somebody's allowed to call up somebody and say, look, we have not moved this issue on in weeks. We have to get it done. We don't need another meeting. We need to move it forward. And therefore, the principles can be realistic and aspirational, and most people buy in without being a statement of absolute fact that this is how you always operate.
Which encourages the questioning culture. I'd like to pull out one point, though, because when we started talking about culture, you talked about employees' happiness.
Yes.
And you talked about it as a good culture.
Yes.
Both of those sort of imply that culture is ultimately articulated in how much people enjoy working in a place. And there's therefore an empirical axis. But then you've gone on to talk about, no, we're very specific about our culture, and there are these principles that drive it. And some people who aren't suited to it naturally won't enjoy working out and will leave. So I just want to tease out a point. We spend a lot of our time thinking about this because the initial, rather superficial look at culture is, we have a good culture. But actually what you've described is a very specific culture that some people would enjoy and some wouldn't. Is what you're finding that people are happy because it has been that self-replicating engine? Or is it because the articulation of your principles is essentially a good way to work for everybody? I'd be interested in that difference.
Yeah, so it's certainly not optimized for general happiness, right? So because it's optimized for a specific type of happiness. So, for example, there's when people leave the pub, they might be happy, or when people leave the gym, they might be happy. But that's a different sort of happy, right? Right. So, leaving the gym, you have a sense of achievement, and you have a sense of worth that you spent time there and something good of it, and it's that sort of happiness. It's not pandering to every possible way. So, for example, we value hard work, but we attract people who like to work hard, right? And we attract people who like to be ambitious in a team sense, as in the team achieves something and they really get a kick out of it. I mean, there's plenty of jobs where there's nothing wrong in the world not being ambitious. I mean, I'm not desperately ambitious about things that aren't to do with work. I'm certainly not very ambitious in the gym, but what I mean is that's okay. But we like the people who really want to do it and get a buzz out of really achieving things in business. So the happiness, it isn't just general happiness; it's focused happiness on those sort of specific things.
That's a very nice distinction. That seems to me to be the title of a future blog, which is "We Optimize for a Certain Type of Happiness." I think there's a lot in that because the casual reading of happiness is sort of universal. Eat a plate of cake and feel nice. Yeah, and you're talking about something different.
Yes, and I think companies go wrong because they get unbalanced on this, and then when somebody says, can I have this, can I have that, and then they pander to these things but ignore the big picture. So people have this kind of short-term happiness, but the companies doesn't feel like a great success, so that they're not working towards the goal. So it all has to be put into that that end objective about building great products and building a great company.
Fascinating. I love that description. So let's move on to perhaps zoom out a little bit. So I in my introduction, I talked about your experience going from rhetorical systems, phonetic arts, Google, and now Thought Machine. And you've talked a little bit about what you found in Google and when you sold phonetic arts to Google. But that's an entrepreneurial sweep spanning 25 years or so, more or less.
Afraid so, yeah.
And also, one thing, when I looked at it and looked at the various timings, the rhetorical systems was started right at the latest stage of the dot-com boom going on in the sort of really spanning 98, 99 up into 2000, 2001. So that must have been heady times. But can you talk a little bit about your experience as an entrepreneur? So you founded 3 companies or co-founded 3 companies. I'll come to the co-founder thing in a second. Just talk a little bit about that sweep and your experience of it, what you've learned along the way, and why you keep coming back for more, which is a sort of perhaps a deeper question.
Yeah, I mean, so my very first job was being a researcher in Edinburgh University. So I did a PhD there and did academic research in AI, and I loved it. But I thought I would have a career in a university, but really, it was never for me. Now, it took me a long time to realize that. And I was having breakfast with the Lord Mayor yesterday, and the great and the good of the UK scientific community were there, who do all the, and Chris Whitty was there, and and a bunch of other professors. But they're talking about the complexities of the funding in the UK and academic research and different bodies, and trying to get this sorted out with the new government. I thought, it's just not for me. So in hindsight, I was always born to be an entrepreneur. But when we wind back, so through podcasts and blogs and books and just articles on the internet, the world of entrepreneurship and startups and tech companies is well known to everybody. There's nobody who wanted to know how a tech company worked could not find the answer today. I mean, that's kind of absurd. But when we started, we were clueless. So
most people were in the dot-com bar. I was there.
But a lot of those dot-com companies were at least in the Silicon Valley. I mean, we weren't. We were in Scotland. I mean, there was us and there was one other kind of startups in Scotland, and there was 2 VCs which each had 2 people in them, and it was just it was really cottage industry. So we started and we had a bit of success, but we had no idea what we're doing. But the first one was a great fun company, but I had taken the best bits of the university and kind of privatized it into that thing. We had some elements of the thought machine culture, so that was great. But the naivety about how to build a business was awful. I remember in a early meeting with lawyers, they said IPO, and I said, "What does IPO mean?" So I ended up paying a top lawyer to tell me what an IPO was. Yeah, and it's just ridiculous. I would say though that many starting entrepreneurs don't know something, and you have to be very careful about judging them and not knowing a thing, because these things aren't difficult to know. So I've certainly seen companies that overpitch and underpitch. The ones that overpitch are ones that have read every blog and looked at every article, and they know all the lingo and they spew it out. And you've got to be a little bit wary about that, because you're just going to invest in somebody who's the best pitcher you've ever met. But the ones who stumble along, often there's something in there, and they just need a bit of mentorship to get them up to speed. So, but Rhetorical, to answer your question a bit more directly, so Rhetorical was a classic deep tech company. I had worked on text to speech at Edinburgh University, and that was a text to speech company. It was doing speech output from computers, and for any real purpose. We didn't even focus on a particular domain. And it was the classic university spin out sort of thing, where I have something, I'm very good at it, I'm going to start a company and I'm going to try and find somebody to buy our products, regardless if it makes any financial or economic or market sense at all, right? That's what nearly everybody does. And then you either go bust or you get bought, and that's what happened to us. And then I had a short stint at Cambridge University, where I wrote a book. And then I founded Phonetic Arts, which is very similar. Now, Phonetic Arts was meant to be version 2, and it was meant to be much more successful, but we had desperately bad luck and timing, and we hit the credit crunch just as we were meant to get growth. So very, very hard to get that company growing. But the same thing happened again. We had moderate success in sales, but we built something very, very valuable, and that's when Google came knocking and made me an offer.
And they incorporated that technology into their text to speech engine. right?
That's right. So this is classic piece of advice about how to get acquired by a big company. So big companies do lots of things. Google, Amazon, Apple, all of them. They're very smart. All the people could build anything they want, but they often have gaps. So Google's issue was they'd spent a lot on speech to text, speech recognition. They had a great team that spent a lot on speech recognition, but they had forgotten sort of the speech output part. And then they realized that, and then they were kind of having to license things that weren't very good. And they initially bought a license from us. And then they had, and then when Siri and things like that really took off, then there was a burning need. And of course, we were the perfect, thing to fill the gap that they had. So, and that's why the acquisition happened. After the acquisition, we became the speech output of all of Google, and the main use was driving directions. So all Google Maps driving directions came from us. But anything that was, kind of voice interactive with a computer was us. I still remember the magical moment. I was actually in the States. I was watching a American football game, and a Google advert came on, and this kid spoke to it, and it spoke out using our technology. And I thought, right, finally got it made. I've actually been in an advert.
And that would be incorporating the speech to text and then set text to speech, right? It's two sides of the same coin for that sort of functionality. As a relative technical layman, how different is that as a problem to solve from a technical perspective? Because you said they put all their effort into speech to text, but they didn't have the text to speech. And I'm not going to oversimplify and say isn't it just in reverse? Isn't the same process in reverse? But how different is the problem technically?
So that's not a naive question. So it has ebbed and flowed between the two things. So for example, today, so my technology is still being used for all the kind of basic things in Google. So driving directions I can still hear. But all the super cool stuff they do now, they've got newer systems which use deep belief nets and use various more modern neural network architectures. And in that, the speech recognition and the speech synthesis, or the text to speech and speech to text, are much more similar.
Okay.
In our particular one, they diverted, and we'd taken a different path because we had high confidence that we could do it differently. But I think they've come together again, and they will. No, it's not strictly speaking in reverse, but it's because if you speak, it will come out as text. But if you get text to generate speech in whose voice,
right?
And so there's a lot more richness in speech that has to be generated from text.
And I'm going to dive down the rabbit hole a little and hopefully come back out in a moment once we're done with it, but. One of the big challenges, and this is interest within Culture 15 because we're using speech to text, is inference, cultural references, different languages. There's on the superficial side, translation is a mathematical construct. In reality, if you've ever spoken or learned another language, you know it's not, right? There are different words mean different things in different languages. How do you handle that, even just on a text to speech element? As you say, what voice do you use? What inference? Often there's a sentence construct which will sound right in one way or sound wrong in another. And then when you work in a different language, then there's a whole different set of translation either way, both speech to text and text to speech. How do you handle that inference, cultural references, where people don't speak the same way all around the world? So how does that work?
Yeah, but I mean, so I did my PhD in linguistics. It was kind of half linguistics, half AI, and people in the linguistics department used to debate all the time: are all languages the same, and that they're just trivial differences, or are they deeply different? Now, the kind of the creative people say, "Oh no, they're completely different. How dare you say those cultures?" But the other people, another school would say, "Look, those are just trivial differences." And so, for example, in English, you put the adjective before the noun, in French, you put the adjective after the noun. But in no language do you put the adjective 7 words away from the noun and always keep it there. Have
you learned a Slavic language?
Yeah. There are certainly languages which have mind-blowing levels of complexity compared to English. So Slavic numbering systems would would send a non-native speaker over the edge. So
Indeed.
they are certainly complicated. I remember working on a Russian, and I said, I don't speak Russian. I said, how do we do this? And then my colleague later said, yeah, I've got it sorted out. So how do you solve it? Oh, well, I phoned my dad. He's a professor of Russian literature, and he says you do it this way. And I said, oh, come on. It's
not an answer.
Yeah. So for our level of sophistication, the machine learning takes care of it. It's good enough, and there are enough patterns in people's languages, and that you can do it. Now you have to realize that all machine learning is just an incredibly no, not all machine learning. All generative machine learning is just an incredibly impressive conjuring trick. The AI does not know what it's saying or why it's saying it. It is just mimicking what people do, but at a very, very superficial level. So you just feed it the data. I'm oversimplifying, decades and billions of points of compute, but you just feed it the data and it mimics it. So, but it doesn't really know what it's doing. So it has no idea. It has no real idea what it just knows that sometimes you speak like this and sometimes you speak like that, and we call this one French or we call this one English, but we don't really know why. And so all these things fall into patterns, and all those patterns can be learned.
And I know you don't want to be pulled too deep into an AI conversation because you don't consider yourself too much of an expert, but that sort of sets up the obvious question, which is, does that then mean, in your opinion, that a sort of self-aware thinking AI is still some distance away?
Well, we have to be careful, right? So the thing that is grabbing everybody's attention these days is generative AI. And generative AI is very, very impressive, but it is very, very superficial, right? So it doesn't understand what it's saying. And it really, really doesn't understand what it's saying. But it's
hence the hallucinations they come out with.
Hence it, because it just goes off on some wild tangent. Like, what the hell are you talking about now? Yeah. Right, but not all AI is like that. So there's a lot of attention now on reasoning AI and inference, as you say, and things that say. So the problem with generative AI is it's never doing anything new or original. It's just doing the best that's out there. So if you say, write me a song, it'll write you a song. But if you say, write me a song better than any other song, well, it's never going to be able to do that. But when you look at AlphaGo and things like that, that is a different sort of AI, where that is learning how to solve the problem. And when you say, can you beat a human? Yeah, it can beat a human. So Gen AI can beat an average person on nearly anything, but it can't beat the best in the world because it is the accumulative knowledge of everything that's out there. Whereas there are other AI systems which are genuinely learning how to do something. Now, but so you get down to this philosophical difference, which is, of course, it's still ones and zeros, right? It still doesn't really know at an empathy level what it's doing, but at least it knows better about what it's doing than a Gen AI system, which is just an incredibly good technique about guessing the next word and saying what to say next. Yeah. Look, I've been working in AI a long time, and even I'm tricked by Gen AI. I go, it just seems cleverer than I know how it works, and it just seems cleverer than that.
Yes, and that therein lies some of the dangers of taking it literally and universally. Okay, and I said I'd come back out of that rabbit hole, and I will now, because we could go down that, follow that path. To come back to the entrepreneur's path, it seemed to me that rhetorical systems and phonetic arts were sort of version 1 and version 2 of the same story to a certain degree.
Yes.
And then you sold that to Google and you spent 2 years in Google. But you rolled with Thought Machine, you rolled the dice again with actually a different chart. So I am genuinely interested from a personal level, what compelled you to roll the dice again? Because that's there's something about this cycle which obviously is irresistible to you.
Yeah, so I enjoyed working at Google, and not everybody does enjoy being acquired. A lot of people go, I'm an entrepreneur, I have my own company, and now I'm an employee. And there's certainly a bit of that, But I realized that my second company really wasn't a great success. I mean, we had a successful exit, and our technology was incredibly successful. As an organization, in terms of what we wanted to achieve, we never got there. Now, when I joined Google, so Google was also in some sense a university spin-out. Larry and Sergey were both doing PhDs at Stanford. And you can still see that, certainly in the early days. It's got still an academic style of DNA, just like my early companies did. But in A-B comparison, I said they're roughly the same age as me, just a little bit younger. And I go, so how did they build this incredible global company and I didn't? And so you can, obviously there's certain things. So maybe they're like way smarter than me, and I wouldn't deny that. But there's other things you say, well, no, there are real concrete reasons that they did things very, very well that are copyable. And we did copy them. For example, how you recruit people. We talked about culture. We talked about, another thing is how to look at products. So some things in Google are what you call clever, and some things are what you call not clever. So a clever thing is search, and a clever thing is AI. But maps isn't clever, or email isn't clever. It's just a map. And what it is an incredibly good map, though. You can zoom in effortlessly. You can do driving directions. You can do 3D, but it's just a map. If you showed somebody from the 1960s an app on a phone with the map, you say, "What's that?" They say, "It's a map." If you showed them AI, they go, "Wow!" So it's just a map, but it's done incredibly well. Email is done incredibly well. YouTube just says videos, but it's done incredibly well. You can do simple things incredibly well and build a great business. So what is banking? We're just storing money in different parts of the balance sheet. We're moving money in and out. We just need to do it incredibly well. So not every company, so one of the key findings, not every company has to be, on quotes, a hard problem or a clever problem. You can do things that are very, very day-to-day and very routine, but just do them incredibly well. And that is a key difference in Thought Machine, whereby instead of doing all this, clever AI stuff, we thought we'll just tackle banking. Everybody needs it. Everybody uses it. It is just, people had banks in the Middle Ages, but it's not done well today. So let's do it well and create value by doing that. Plus the good culture. And I think that's the basis of the company.
And how would you self-score yourself so far, 10 years into that story?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh dear. You see, no. So I'm notoriously bad about this, and I am not prone to a lot of self-reflection. So when people ask me that question, I typically, again, just switch to talking about how well Thought Machine is. And then people go, but what's the difference between you and Thought Machine? And I go, yeah, I find that difficult to separate.
Well, my point is, your answer to my question was a little bit, okay, I had exposure to a better way to do building the business by your time at Google. And there was a sense of unfinished business or unrealized potential from your previous efforts.
So how have we done, yes.
So how is that playing out in your mind?
So here's what I'd say in the answer. I'd say in terms of engineering, products and culture, it's gone incredibly well, right? So I'm very pleased about that. In terms of impact on the banks, incredibly well. We've signed some really, really impressive banks. The one thing I'd say that splits is when you're in one of those B2C companies, that your the ability to accelerate is simply far, far faster than you could do in an enterprise SaaS company.
Right.
So when you look at the most meteoric successes, they're nearly always in B2C companies because something becomes, quotes, viral.
Revolut being a good example, right?
Takes off incredibly fast. We got long sales cycles and sell to banks. That said, when we sign banks, they sign 5 or 10 year contracts, and sometimes it's going to be 20-year contracts. So we get a lot of value at the other end, and that's the nature of the infrastructure. So I am happy as an entrepreneur. I like to do it faster and achieve the goal more quickly. But I am actually pretty pleased with what we've done. The product is well regarded by banks. We're by no means there yet. Basically set out what we want to achieve, which is build fantastic new core banking systems at scale and get them deployed into the world's largest banks. And that mission is on track.
Well, that's the toughest nut to crack, I think, because of the incumbency, not the incumbency problem, but the existing internal mainframe-based problem that you're trying to migrate from. Okay. And I can't resist asking this question on the founder, co-founder dynamic. So all three of the businesses that we've talked about, you put your role down as co-founder. And so you've obviously done it with others, but yet in the most recent two, you've also been the CEO.
Yes.
So talk to me a little bit about pros and cons, founder versus co-founder. And this podcast is listened to people who have an interest in culture, but it's also listened to people who have an interest in entrepreneurialism. So that is an interesting dynamic. So pros and cons.
Well, I would start that by saying that when you look at the average of a bunch of startups, that there's all these common factors, and having co-founders is a common one. But when you look at the outliers, you have the most incredible range of companies and the most incredible range of founders and backgrounds. So you have founders that have had tons of education. You got founders who have had no education. You have founders who really had a clear mission when they started. You have founders who had no mission when they started. You have founders, and it's all over the place. So, for example, if you want an unusual story, I think Peloton is a very good unusual story. I can't remember the name of the founder, but he said he was turned down by 400 venture capitalists. And they said, "What do you mean they've got a bike? And how much does the bike cost? $2,000? And then what do you do? Hang on, the bike doesn't go anywhere, and it's like they couldn't get anywhere. But of course, it's a wonderful niche product for a particular type of market, very successful, and so there's lots of kind of edge cases in terms of business idea or what you're trying to do, which are very important. So there were themes where people say, if you do this is more common, but I would certainly not rule out anything. So currently, the thinking is always to have a co-founder, but I think that is overdone. There are lots of successful companies that did not have co-founders, right? So Facebook really only had one founder.
Amazon.
Netflix, Amazon. So there's plenty of it. The pros and cons are simple. In the very early days, having co-founders is great, because you got a little team and you're there in the garage,
you're not on your own,
and you're all that together. But it always causes problems later on, because somebody has to be the boss, and if you're very lucky, somebody will be the CEO and somebody will be the CTO. But often that split doesn't happen, because the CTO is the founder and the CEO. Well, you go, well, you're all right, but you're not a world class CEO. So I would say Thought Machine's a slightly weird one. So strictly speaking, I am the only founder. But when I think of today, I really do think I've got co-founders, because many of the early people, like Will Montgomery, our CTO, joined in August or September 2014. So I've been here 10 years and 4 months, and he's been here 10 years and 1 month. It just sounds, and many of the other engineers who started in 2014. So I mean, we are very joined at the hip. I mean, it's a single team. I mean, so even though technically, him and the others aren't founders, it still feels we're very, very close, and especially when talking through, problems and issues or what needs to be done next.
Right, it creates a shared endeavor.
And I would just say, get all the advice you have, but don't, you still have to make your own way. If you think I just think this is the way for me, don't freak out. But don't do that through complete ignorance of everything. There's lots of people that got there through unusual paths.
Very good. Well, there's two parts to that, is what it takes to be a good entrepreneur and whether you need others to do it. And I think that's pretty clear. Thank you. You told me before we started recording, you didn't like the premise of the question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. And because we like to ask all of our podcast guests this question. So if you think about Thought Machine, you just talked about your co-founders in the early days. If there was an analogy in the animal kingdom, some sort of collective noun that actually reflected the culture and the team at Thought Machine, what would it be?
Yeah, so I said, I looked at that question, I thought, no, that's a bit odd. It's the reason I find it odd is, I mean, there's lots of animals that superficially look very impressive. So I've got some birds of prey who kind of live in my garden, and I watch them and they hover up there, and occasionally they dive and I go, So that's I've got deer in my garden too. So
must have a big garden.
I do, yeah. So that, but take it back to where we started. That culture is the defining characteristic of Thought Machine, and culture is something that is artificially created and artificially determined. Now, that doesn't mean to say it's diminished, but culture is one of the things that distinguishes humans from the rest of the animal kingdom. and you create culture. And by creating culture, you can do more. So you can work in a team, and by working in a team, you can achieve more. So there's lots of studies about the animal world, and people, try to say exactly where the boundary between the animals and humans is. As I said, I used to work in linguistics, and people used to try and find exactly what the difference between animal noises is. But for example, animals will help each other, but only in quite specific ways. They have, for example, they've got no concept of lending. You can't lend, one animal can't lend some food to another and then can't keep a record and then say, well, yesterday you gave me a banana, so can I have one back today, or anything like that. So culture enables you to be far more productive and far more effective in a team. By orders of magnitude, and so it is culture that's defining thought machine, and culture in the sense of being invented only really happens in the human world.
Very reasonable answer. It's the first person who's rejected the premise of the question, which I like very much.
What do other people say then?
Well, all sorts of things.
Yeah.
We had an artistic director of a ballet company who, of course, chose swans. But we've had all sorts. One company described themselves as a watering hole where all types of species are welcome.
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah.
So there's different, and it's deliberately opening question. Final question, Paul, and we've really taken a tour around all sorts of different stops. But let's come back to you. So the song question. So if you were to summarize your leadership experience so far to date, and I suspect there's more to come, in a song, what would that song be?
Yes. So the song I chose, which is the song I chose a long time, is a song called Life's Been Good. So for those of you who are like under the age of 50, so Life's Been Good is by Joe Walsh, and Joe Walsh was a member of the Eagles. And so let me explain this. So the world is full of music, the world is full of lyrics, but there's an awful lot of mopey lyrics out there. I was just at the David Gilmour concert. He used to be in Pink Floyd, and
nice.
I mean, a wonderful band, but dear God, they're very miserable. It's always,
another brick in the wall.
Yeah, right? and another brick in the wall. And we listen to the Smiths, it's all miserable again. And I just go, come on, people. I mean, and I used to think, so I played in a band when I was young, and I always wanted to be a rock star. And Joe Walsh being a rock star, and the song is about actually being a rock star is pretty damn good. And I like the song because I said, if I was a rock star, I think I'd enjoy it. And if I can quote one line, it goes, I've got a Maserati, it does 185. I lost my license and now I don't drive. And I just think, it's a great song. So if anybody hasn't listened to it, Life's Been Good will cheer you up.
Oh, that's fantastic. Paul, thanks. And that's a wonderful thought and sentiment to end on. So thanks so much for your time and sharing all your insights. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.